What she found, she says, sickened her.
I don't believe that they're safe within their church.
I am extremely honored to be speaking with today's guest. She is a personal hero of mine. I first saw her on TV when I was 14 years old as an indoctrinated Jehovah's Witness teenager growing up in a devout Jehovah's Witness home. When I first saw her on Dateline, on a famous Dateline special in 2002. Specifically, it was my first time hearing about the Jehovah's Witnesses organization covering up a massive systemic child sexual abuse problem for decades. And here was this woman on TV using her voice, exposing these abuses. And she was a former Jehovah's Witness. She had once been dedicated to the organization, but now she was exposing these abuses that were happening within the organization. And I just remember sitting there in front of the TV in shock and awe, watching her. And even though I was indoctrinated at the time and being raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, I had my secret doubts even as a teenager, and secretly deep down, I believed that what she was saying was true. She was an inspiration to me back then. She's an inspiration to me now. Quite frankly, I'm still in shock and awe. I cannot believe I've come full circle and I am meeting her now and speaking with her now. So please, without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the channel Barbara Anderson. Barbara, thank you so much for joining the channel today. It is a huge honor to have you on.
Thank you, Bethany. It's my pleasure to be here. I am so happy to share my life story with others. So hopefully they understand the full issues of being one of Jehovah's Witnesses and why people like me leave the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, I come from a background that was quite interesting. I'm a gal who was raised by Polish Catholic parents, and each of them have an interesting past. I'd like to share for just a few minutes a little bit about their past. So my father actually was a rigger. That is an individual who operates a crane, and he worked in many military installations. He worked at aviation companies, Pratt and Whitney. He was associated with the Navy. He wasn't in the Navy. He was associated with the Navy for certain skills. And when he was young, he was asked to go to San Francisco. We come from Long Island, New York. That's where I was born in 1940. My father, when World War II became a reality, he volunteered to assist the Navy in San Francisco. He was loading the bullet for the atomic bomb. Wow. That was part of his days spent in San Francisco, and from there he spent another 2 years in Hawaii, operating a crane, and basically he loaded airplanes on ships. The part of the atomic bomb that he loaded was 10,000 pounds. We had a very ordinary life as Catholics. We weren't very, very active in the church. My father was an altar boy as a child at the Catholic Church, and he observed things that he didn't like. He used to tell us how he took the money that was donated to the church during church services, and he would take bags of money and put it in the back of the priest's car in the trunk. And then he would take the alcohol out of the back of the car and put it in the rectory. So as a child or a young man, he was sour on the church. We weren't active Catholics. Now, my mom, her background was very different. She was born into a Catholic family in Poland. So when she was 15 years old, her father put her on a ship and sent her to the United States. There were family members in the United States, and he wanted her out of the area, which was soon to be engulfed in war. So she came to the United States in 1930. Interesting part of her tale is this. Her father, when he was a young man, used to come to the United States by ship, and he visited Chicago. So he was familiar with the United States. He spoke 5 languages. His English was very, very good. Consequently, my mother knew some English when she came to the States, but her mother was a very zealous Catholic. So when my grandfather decided that he wanted to live in the United States, he came to Chicago. This is like turn of the century, so before World War One. Many Europeans did this regularly. They traveled by ship, they came to the States, and then they'd go back to Europe. And he met his wife to be on one of those trips. She also was from Poland, but she was going back and forth too. So they decided that they wanted to move to the United States. So he came to Chicago and he rented an apartment, and he brought one of their children with him. It was a boy. And then he was here in Chicago for a year. During that year, the apartment he rented for himself and his son had no icons hanging on the wall. In the Catholic religion, you have pictures of Mary and Jesus and crosses. But the woman who rented the place, he called her the landlady, she started talking to him about no hellfire, no Trinity. And she was Polish. Chicago had a huge settlement of Polish people. So he was adopting her ideas, and years went by. We never really understood until I pieced all of it together. He became very interested in what she had to say, that he was never interested in talking about anything except the Bible once in a while. But his wife was very dedicated to the church. His mother came over from Poland and stayed a little while and went back to Poland. His wife became pregnant, and that would be my mother. But the priest would come to the house every so often, and they would argue about the Bible. My mother said that at nighttime she could hear them arguing, and my grandfather said, "Why do you teach that there is a burning hell for the wicked?" And the priest said, "People are like pigs; they have to be herded." She heard that, and as a child, she really didn't adopt the Catholic Church. It was just a name for their religion. And consequently, when she was put on the ship to come to relatives' house in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. She really didn't believe in much of anything about religion, but called herself Catholic. Catholicism is not an important thing in our lives, but education is. And on my mother's side, my grandfather he was the sheriff actually of the one town city where they lived. And they always discussed the world and politics, etc., like that. So she grew up with that, but not about religion. So when I was born, I'm second, my brother was born first in 1937, we didn't get much education about the church. We were just called Catholic. My mother was very embittered when the parish priest found out that he had Catholics living in the area that weren't coming to church. So he came visiting, and the first thing he wanted was a donation. So it wasn't a spiritual thing. And so we were kind of let loose on religious belief. None of us were active Catholics. The people who were new in my life, they weren't even active Catholics. And the war years really did a job on me because of the way it affected my family. My father was away for 3 years in the war. So I wanted to see a better world. And early at that time, a man came by house to house, I found out later. And we had a dog. And the dog barked a lot, and he was afraid of the dog. Anyway, my mother came out from the house and to talk to this man. I had a big fence. And he left a book with her, and that was around 1943. That book was in our porch library for years and years and years. The man never came back. And we figure it was because of this, said on the fence, bad dog, mad dog, whatever. So he never came back. But it was, we know from what the book was, it was one of Rutherford's books. So nobody read it. So even though I was always asking questions about the world and hoping for answers about a better world, it didn't happen.
Well, that is a really interesting family background. Thank you so much for sharing, Barbara. Can you tell us more about this book, this Rutherford character, and how your family came to be involved with what you would find out is eventually the Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yes, well, I looked at that book many times. I was a real nut for reading, even when I was 7 or 8 years old. In fact, I read my aunt's copy of Grapes of Wrath, and that was an adult book, and that's how I learned how babies were born. Otherwise, I would never have known because my mother would not tell me. And so I was a real fighter for the right thing, the right way to be towards others. One time I was walking to church. At this point in my life, when I was 7 years old, I wanted something to believe in. So Mother said I could go over to the church and take communion instructions, which the church wasn't far. We lived in an area right at the border of New York City. So we lived in Queens County, not Kings County. And so I would walk over to the church and take my instructions. And there was a little girl in the neighborhood, too, that would go with me. So I was also taking lessons at the YWCA, how to do tap dancing and ballet. There was a little girl in the neighborhood that would walk to the church, as I said. And one day there was a car parked on the side of the road, and there was a man inside of the car behind the driver's wheel, and he leaned over towards the passenger side. That's where the sidewalk was. And he beckoned for us to come over. And so my girlfriend, she was prone to do the things like that. But I was trying to hold her back. And when I grabbed her arm, I leaned down. And what happened was I saw that he had exposed himself. So I grabbed her and we started running to the church. And she didn't know what was going on. So as soon as he got to the church, I told one of the nuns what happened. She called the police, and the next day, we two little girls with our parents were standing before a lineup at the police station trying to identify the person. That was my first introduction into a sexual issue like that. Now, I'm going to school, and I have my little girlfriends. Two of my girlfriends were molested by the Catholic priest and told me about this. And they were latchkey kids. There was no dad, and the moms worked. So the girls would go over a few times a week to the Catholic church after school, and they had things for the kids to do. And that's where the priest molested them. There was no reporting to the authorities, and the priest was never dealt with. So there again, I'm beginning to realize the impact there in my life. I was very dissatisfied with the injustices. So I had a little girlfriend. I was 12, and we were doing homework in her bedroom upstairs, and she had a big window seat. And so we were sitting there doing the homework, and her father knocked at the door. Now, her father was a businessman in Manhattan, and he had wore the white suit. And my father was a blue-collar worker. This man was a businessman in Wall Street. And so he told his daughter that her mom wanted her for an errand downstairs, and would she go down there and talk to her mom about something. And he came in the room and sat down next to me on the window seat. And I was just at that age where I was impressed by this person. He talked to me like I was a grown woman. And while he was talking to me, this also was the age where we wore skirts. And he put his hand up my leg. And I understood right away what was going on. I never said a word. I gathered my books up. I stood up, gathered my books out, and walked out the door. And that there again made an impression on me as far as sexual abuse. So it was at this house before that happened where a woman had called door to door. She was religious, and my girlfriend's mother was busy, and she told us, she said, "Get rid of that lady. I took a book from her, but I'm not interested. Tell her I'm busy." Well, my girlfriend didn't want to do it. I said, "I'll do it." So I go over to the door and I tell the lady that the lady of the house was busy. Well, she wasn't going to take no for an answer. So I said, "What religion are you?" I said, "Catholic." She then introduced me to understanding the Lord's Prayer. And she said, "The kingdom come there's going to be a kingdom and what it would do for the earth." I was so impressed. I stood there with her for a good 30 minutes. And the girlfriend kept saying, "Come on back, come on back." I said, "No, I want to hear this." And then I asked her, I said, "Would you come to my house?" And she said, "Sure." And she walked her territory. It was hot in July at that point. And so she wasn't in a car. And so she was enjoying standing in the shade of the house talking to me. So when I said, I told her where we lived, and it was around the corner. That evening she came. And my mother recognized her because her mother had taken the Watchtower away from her. This was 1954. We invited her in, and the discussion started. And I didn't know what religion she was. I did not know what religion she was. We agreed to a Bible study, and we studied for about 3 months when I asked what religion was she. So she said Jehovah's Witnesses. We never heard of them. Even though we lived not far from Yankee Stadium, and they had the 1950 convention, 1953 convention at Yankee Stadium in Long Island, in our newspapers, they never made a mention of those assemblies. So we continued our studies, and I was sure that this was what I wanted. And my mother was okay with it too. She felt that life was a dead end. Just as soon as you get old and you get smart, you die. That was my mother's feelings about life. So she made arrangements with us after we studied a few months to have lunch. Mother and I had lunch at Bethel. And it was thrilling to me. But at the same time, especially since I was at that age, 1954, I was 14. I was old for my years. I looked older, and I was quite sophisticated for a 14-year-old. So it was impressive. The tables set 10 people, and most of the time, if you weren't sitting at a visitor's table, it would be 10 men sitting at the table. Well, this table for visitors had 5 young men sitting at it, plus the visitors. And I was in seventh heaven, just at this age. And they were asking me and about myself and all of that. And so I'll never forget that day, because not only was I impressed by them, I was also not impressed by what happened after that. When we finished our lunch, the man at the head table, and there was 200 then at Bethel, and he made an announcement not to leave after the prayer, final prayer. And everybody remained seated, and that's what we did. And then he called the names of 7 young men and asked them to come to the table, the head table, which they did. And he told them to stand by the wall. And this was Nathan Knorr, who was president of the organization then. And he berated these young men for the past weekend that they were at a party in Long Island and they were drinking. And he berated them so badly that, told them that they were going to be, they're condemned to death for their actions and whatever. And after that, we were really shaken up. That was the deciding moment for her not to become a witness. She never, ever saw anybody, any adult talk to young people like that, because she understood, young people do their thing, and they can get into trouble. So she said, I had made up my mind that I wasn't going to pursue this religion. And I said, well, why did you? She said, because of you. She said, you loved it so much. I knew that if I forbid you, you would run away from home. And I said, no. She said, yes. And so I said, well, maybe you're right. And what I had in mind was the fact that the witnesses would have took me in, and my mother knew it. If I had wanted to pursue how I felt about this. So it was too bad that she didn't do what she wanted to do and forbid me. But I met such interesting people. Even on the factory tour, there was a man at the front desk who directed us into the building to that's where they were printing and the Watchtower and Awake and books. That man, by the way, was being punished. He was at the front desk there telling us, arranging tours for the factory and us. But eventually he became an apostate. And his wife and he left Bethel. He was in the service department and demoted down to working in the factory at speaking to people, visitors. And yet he was a very, very brilliant man because he did not agree with the blood doctrine of Jehovah's Witnesses. And so that's why he was speaking negatively. This man eventually became what's called an apostate. And he even ran articles in California newspaper to discuss the blood issue with Jehovah's Witnesses. Eventually, he died, of course. And I remember when I was at the headquarters, eventually, one of the women told me that one day that mentioned his name, and because she had been at Bethel when he left the organization, and she cursed his name out and said the SOB died. And so there was such hatred for those that left the organization. So I was exposed to that type of thing. In the interim, my family moved to Miami, Florida in 1956. Now, I did have some issues with the Watchtower over some things, but I favored them over the Catholic Church, and that was over the superior authorities. The Watchtower believed that the superior authorities in the Bible, in Romans, was Jehovah and Jesus Christ. And the Catholic Church believed that it was the governments. And so when I did the research on it, I believed that the Catholic Church was right. And I was 15 then, but I loved the witness stuff, loved it. I was so active. The first 2 years before my family moved to Miami in 1956, I had converted 5 people into the witnesses, going from the door-to-door work. In fact, one of them was a ballroom teacher of dancing, and she taught me how to do ballroom dancing after she became a witness. So we used to invite Bethelites to the house. I had a glorious youth. Those 2 years of my life were wonderful. The congregation servant was an ex-Bethelite. He had the top people like McMillan and others that eventually Sidlek that became governing body members. He had them out his house, and I get to meet them. The witnesses then danced. They had finished basements. Those 2 years were remarkable. And I got 3 proposals from Bethelites in those 2 years because I looked older and I was very mature, where the girls that were raised in it hated the witness work and they didn't like anything about me growing up, and I was thrilled with it all. So then when my family moved to Miami, I missed all of that tremendously. So after a year there, I teamed up with 2 girls and we took an assignment to Mississippi. The next year, there was going to be the big convention, 1958, in Yankee Stadium. So I decided and asked the girls, let's head to New York and volunteer, which we did. I got myself a part-time job, they did, and 2 of us worked at the headquarters typing in rooming requests. When the witnesses go door to door, they found rooms for 250,000 people, and we had to do the typing, all that. Well, I went to the same congregation that I belonged to before we went to Miami, and that was the Hempstead congregation in Long Island. A woman moved in that year I was gone, and she came from Dallas, Texas. So she had a son at Bethel, and so I didn't know that. I had no idea. She liked me. I was always talking about the witnesses, and I always had something to say how grateful I was. She thought I was an interesting person, so she told me that she was going to have a party at her house. So she had this party, 3 of us and other girls from the congregation. like I said, I didn't know she had a son. So I hear the back screen door closed. It's summertime. And I hear a voice saying to the woman in the kitchen, and I'm in the living room, sitting in a chair. And so I hear she say, it's the blonde in the living room that I want you to meet. So he comes into the living room, and of course, they put music on the Victrola. So they put music on, and they put a tango on. And he asked the girls one by one, he said, can you tango? And they said, one by one, no. And I was the last, because he put me last. I was the only blonde in the living room. And he came to me and he said, can you tango? And I said, yes. Remember, I had learned ballroom dancing 2 years before. And so we tangoed. And that's part of my past history, because when he did the crossover step, he broke the buckle on my new shoes. So I tell everybody, I used to tell them at Bethel how we met, and I said, consequently, he broke that buckle off those shoes, he ruined my shoes, he's been buying my shoes ever since. But that was my introduction to Joe Anderson, who is at the headquarters, and he is in the press room, and he is part of the team that were on the presses. Okay, years and years later, we have a son, and when he goes to Bethel, he's put in the same press room. He even has the same locker his father had 20-something years before, which was a nice coincidence. But let me tell you how we got to Bethel. That was fascinating. When we got married, we were married in 1959. We were engaged at the 1958 assembly. He relented and asked me for a date, and we hit it off. We went to the movies the first time, and we knew there was some attraction between us, and he was very, very cute. And he was funny, too. And he loved Jehovah, and that's what mattered to me. I actually met some of the Kennedy family going to the field service in Palm Beach. You name them, I met them. Well, anyway, this was about a year before we married in 1959. So it was either in this, that was the fall we were married. But somewhere in the spring of that year, I was working my territory in Palm Beach, and I knocked at this mansion, and this man came to the door, and he said, and remember, I'm a New Yorker by heritage, and this man was a New Yorker, and he had a very heavy New York accent. And he says, when I told him who I was, he said, in his accent, he said, I just talked to Nathan. And I said, Nathan who? He said, Nathan, your boss. And I said, my boss? I don't have a boss. He said, yes, you do. Nathan Noor. I said, you talked to Nathan Noor? And he said, yes. He said, I just finished signing the papers. He said, we sold Nathan the Squid buildings. And so what became the two buildings for the Watchtower Society to office buildings, and that's where the lobby was and everything, those two buildings were connected by a bridge over the road. That was the Squibb Pharmaceutical buildings, and they had just sold it to the society. So that night I called Joe up at headquarters. There is no announcement, nada, about this. And I said, guess what? I said, what, sir? Nathan just sold the Squibb buildings. He said, what are you talking about? And so I said, and I told him, I said, the man told me. He said, oh, that's impossible. I said, it's true. You check it out. So he was the first one at headquarters, other than the people who ran the place, to find out about the purchase of the Squibb building. And he found out from me. in Palm Beach. We laughed over that for years. Lance, our son, was 19 years old. My husband and I pioneered on and off for years after he was born. So we prepared him for Bethel. I used to laugh over this. I'd say, when he was a child, as he was growing, I say, Jewish mothers say, when you grow up, you're going to be a doctor. I used to say, when you grow up, you're going to be a Bethelite. And that's how he grew up. So he pioneered as soon as he graduated from school and turned 19. That was the age that they accepted him then. And he went to Bethel. So we were thrilled. And a year later, we went to visit him. When we were there, we were ready to leave on Saturday, and we had toured and saw Joe's old friends from years and years before. When he was there in the 50s, many of his friends stayed at Bethel years, and they married girls, brought them into Bethel, and they were running the place. 20 years later, they had positions of authority at Bethel. So we ate lunch on Saturday with the Bethel family, and it was a half a day of work for most of the younger men. And Joe saw his overseer, Richard Wheelock, from 20 years before in the dining room. And after lunch, Joe went over to talk to him. And Richard remembered Joe, and we're talking. Joe was a licensed plumber. And he had, between pioneering, he was, and remodeling this old house, he was getting his plumbing business going. So Richard asked Joe, what did he do? When Joe said to him, I think Joe was like 49 then, and he says to Richard, you don't need any old folk here, do you? And Richard said, well, what do you do? And Joe says, I'm a licensed plumber. And he says, hold on, don't go anywhere. So he went to the phone, he called the service department, whoever was left there after lunch, who had to work the full day, checked the records, found out that Joe was, not only was he a congregation servant, he was elder, he was assembly servant, he was building kingdom halls, he was involved up to his eye teeth, plus he had pioneered, by the time we got to Bethel, he had pioneered us on and off for years. So when Richard saw that, what responsibilities, he said that just in another minute, he said, I'm going to make arrangements. Richard comes back and he says, I made arrangements. You're going to meet with the man who is the overseer of the construction work worldwide. You're also going to meet with Max Larson over the factories. So, of course, Joe knew Max Larson from years before, but he did not know about the fellow Underwood, who was the construction overseer of the world, as far as the witnesses were concerned. We met with both of them. Both of them told us what was going on. The Bethel family did not know that they had purchased the Bossard Hotel, and they had purchased the 1 million square foot Furman Street building right on the East River. Both were in disrepair, a real mess, and they were desperate for plumbers. We were accepted, literally accepted to Bethel within a few hours. And Max Larson told us, he said, when can you come? Max spent more time talking to me than he did Joe, because he knew Joe, and he also knew Joe's past. But it's the women that the problem is, We're excess baggage to these husbands that are needed at Bethel. So he spent a lot of time talking to me, and he told me some interesting facts that most people don't know to this day. And one of them is this. The buildings that the society built, the new buildings that they built, they hired firms to build them, and then they finished the inside themselves. That is prohibited in New York. In the borough in that borough, and there's a lot of politics there, and there's labor unions galore. So every new building has to be finished by a labor union. He told us why the Watchtower of all the organizations got to finish their own buildings inside, and they needed all this extra help. And the reason for that was, he said, is because he witnessed to the man who was the highest of all the labor unions in New York, and he witnessed to the Catholic man about the Lord's Prayer. And told me he set up the hope that man, with that Catholic man, that there was going to be a better world coming. And he gave permission then on for the Watchtower to finish with their own people the inside. And I've had many people ask me, and I never have told them, I never have gone into it, but they thought that Jehovah was really with them.
So, Barbara, can you take us from this point? So you're in Bethel now with Joe.
We went home.
Okay.
Back to Tennessee. On our trip home, I said to my husband, this has really spoiled our vacation. I said, I got to go back home. And we were told we'd get a letter in the mail, which we did in 2 weeks. And we were back in June to live there. Mm-hmm. And it was so unbelievable. Our whole world has changed. I've been working part-time, and then I was working full-time because we took on this mammoth thing on this house. Joe was working for a builder. I was a plumber for a development that was underway. I was working for the builder, and he had a office, and he also had a business where he could buy things for the houses that he was building. He could buy wholesale. So I was managing that affair. He's the one that told me, he said he could see that I had ability, and I had already been able to type. As a kid, I learned how to type. I did my own shorthand. I worked in different companies in West Palm Beach as a young woman. And so he said, I want you to learn bookkeeping. I said, well, I do know some of bookkeeping. He said, no, I want you to learn professional cost accounting, bookkeeping. My son is in university. He comes home every weekend. I'm going to ask him to teach you this, which he did. This played a big part of my world when I went to Bethel, because I knew cost accounting. So we went back to Bethel, and I had to fill out a form. Joe had to fill out a form. It was about our health. I said on mine that I cannot be around chemicals, industrial chemicals. I'm very allergic to that. Well, Joe didn't have any. And anyway, his job was secure. What were they going to do with me? Of all things, nobody ever read my little card. And they put me in tape duplicating, where they put all the women, older women, who came in with engineers for husbands and special electricians who came in with special skills, their wives who probably never worked a day in their life. And they put them in, the women in tape duplicating. So I'm around industrial chemicals. And of course, 1 month of that, I'm very sick. I talked to the overseer of the tape duplicating, which fell under the Department of Shipping. So Joe said, wait, they're not going to fool with us. They're going to have us go back home. Well, we had dropped our insurances. We had changed our life completely. If I was sick, we'd go home. I haven't got any health insurance, because Bethel said they would take care of that. We were shocked. We didn't know what to do. But they figured out they needed him so desperately, they put me in shipping. And I and 3 or 4 other old people, some of them were in their 80s and 90s, we packed up the special orders for the Kingdom Hall. When you order a special Bible at the Kingdom Hall, well, these were special. These weren't like the big orders that came in. So I did that for a year. then I was transferred into invoicing. That's when they, at the Kingdom Hall, when they order all their watchtowers and awakes, they send in a special invoice. All that is in there is numbers. Well, I was very familiar with using that part of the adding machine. And then what I heard was that they were looking for in engineering construction department, which had 150 people in it. And they were looking for skilled people. They just weren't taking anybody, a housewife who come to Bethel and was cleaning, and then they put her into tape duplicating like me, or like anybody who had no skills. They just put you anywhere. But I had skills. And okay, right at that time, Joe and I know about what is happening at Bethel. We're there about a year and a half. So I'm still in shipping and invoicing. And he tells me he's about at Bethel for a number of months. And he tells me they're looking for a professional type person to work in engineering who has the skills of what's needed there to assist people like himself and so forth. So I go to see the guy who's head over the whole world construction. I tell him about my background. Immediately, I'm transferred into engineering. While I was in engineering, somebody from writing came to see me and asked me about participating in writing an article regarding the expansion work in the city of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I did. I wrote an article and appeared in 89 Awake on the expansion. So also the society was going to build a 30-story building right there on the waterfront, and I worked on the environmental impact statement, and all of this had to go to the mayor and big meetings, and the society was turned down because it was blocking the view of Manhattan and the water, the East River. So they built inland. But anyway, all that was, and I'm with the architectural group in engineering, and we don't have any work because everything was in transition right there. So I asked for an opportunity to work in another department. Well, I did. I went for my interview, and of the 5 people that were there for interviews, I got the job. As time went on, the man who was the overseer of the Awake, and that's Harry Poloyan. And of course, women don't hold a position in the organization. So, but he was telling me things about, he'd been at Bethel 40 years.
Okay.
So Harry Poloyan. And Harry said, if I told Rose, his wife, and they were in their 60s at the time. And he said, if I told her what I know about this child's stuff, abuse stuff, he said, she'd die of a heart attack. And because women don't know anything. So he said, he says, I know your background, and I know how many people you studied with. I know Joe and you are whole soul like we are. And he said, I'm going to tell you this, what's going on. He told me all about the child abuse. And I was on the phone talking to victims. The service department was ordered by the governing body to share in 89 all information about child abuse within the organization with the legal department, which they never did before. The only time the legal department would find out about this stuff was when there was a court case. But the rule became that they had to work together on all of this. If there was a report of child abuse in a congregation, the elders had to call the legal department.
A large portion of my audience, and I know other channels, are very familiar with this situation because they're former Jehovah's Witnesses themselves. They know you, but I know that there's going to be viewers who are watching you for the first time that don't have the insider look, and you are the woman that has been burned into people's memories regarding blowing the cover off of this CSA issue. A lot of you have to understand, a lot of people, I'm a millennial, okay? So I was weaned on the internet, and then social media came out when I graduated high school. And it wasn't until the internet and around my time where people, to this day, I say, you know, yeah, I was raised in the Jehovah's Witnesses, and they have Barbara, no clue that the organization had such a problem. So can you speak to the moment that you discovered that there was such a huge issue, and what specifically, if you can set the record straight, what specifically was the blue envelopes situation? Because people heard that through you were on Dateline. If you feel comfortable speaking about your Dateline experience, even if it's just a little bit of what that was like and the blowback that you received, can you tell us about the blue envelopes, your role in discovering the extent of the child abuse in the organization as a whole, and what that was like, what the pushback was like when you discovered this? Because a lot of people have not been educated in this. That you know it, I know it, a lot of former Jehovah's Witnesses know this, but there's going to be a lot of people listening to this where this is their first exposure to the Jehovah's Witnesses problem and mishandling with child sexual abuse. Can you go more into that for us?
When I was talking with Harry Poloyan about child abuse, and he was asking me how I felt about it, and questions went on between us, he let me in on the society's policies as to how did they handle when there are accusations made of child abuse. And so I learned that they had, their policy was to address it from the Bible. And so that was addressing it from the avenue of sin, not crime. And so when there was a report of child abuse in a congregation, the certain elders would be put together a judicial committee, and they would hear the victim's accusations, and then they would deal with a predator or accused predator. So they were having lots of problems everywhere with this. I'm not saying it was worse than anywhere else, because all the churches were having problems, and they still do. So I learned about their policies, and there had to be two witnesses to, and then I learned about how there had to be two witnesses, a scriptural requirement to make an accusation of wrongdoing. So in a case where a victim claims that person hurt them or abused them, or there was a crime committed, so forth, there had to be two witnesses. Well, in a situation like child abuse, there's only the victim, and that's number one, who is a witness. There's never a number two witness to it other than the predator or the person accused. So without another person who witnessed this, that there wasn't anything done about it. If the accused admitted it, then if he or she was repentant enough, that repentance held, and so they weren't punished because of what the scriptures say about repentance. And I could quote all the scriptures and everything. I could be here for days talking about all of the situation.
How many cases in your career at headquarters, or in the role that you were serving, how many cases or how many times did you hear about this? How prevalent was this?
Well, the last year I was there, I was hearing them every day. I was talking to people. I got permission to make telephone calls to witnesses and non-witnesses who were in the health business, the mental health business. And many of those who were in the mental health business who were witnesses were asked by me on the phone, have they experienced an increase, or how can we help, or whatever I would ask. The people were very surprised, first of all, that a woman was calling, and I would tell them what we needed an answer to different questions, and to fax it in, and it would go to Harry Pulloyan. And so it went to a man. And so I told Harry one day that I really felt that all of this information should be gathered together and make a package up, and should be distributed among the governing bodies so they could see how this was an international problem. It wasn't just one here, one there. And I learned from one particular individual out of Canada where a detective told him, where there were cases he was in, this man was a school teacher, a JW school teacher. And after the situation was revealed and the problems were taken care of, a detective who was working on the case where 2 school teachers had their brakes cut and died in crashes, who had reported child abuse, and they were not witnesses, but they were fully involved in the reporting of a certain person who was a witness, and both of them died. And I got the material in this room. The letters went to the service department, went to the writing department from the people involved, and that I'll never forget that man telling me that a detective, and that's the school teacher, he says, the male school teacher, and he said, the detective told me that due to the dark web, predators all over North America know where they can get at the children, and Jehovah's Witnesses is primary because of our policies and how you can get away with it. And if there aren't 2 witnesses, you get away with it, or the repentance deal, and all kinds of other policies that society had worked out.
At one point, I'm sorry, at one point, was it true, because I've heard this, was it true that the child who had been abused, a minor, would be forced to confront their abuser within these judicial committees?
Yeah, that's right. So that was changed in 2016 out of Canada, actually, at a big case in Canada. So they had on the books in Canada, due to a certain circumstance, I'm talking about legal books, it was put in there that no victim has to confront an abuser.
But prior, for a very long time.
But that wasn't regard just to the witnesses in all cases. So then in the United States in 2016, the policy was part of the policies of the Watchtower in the United States and around the world. So that mess was over. I mean, the accusations of the individuals against the person were graphic, were awful. They had to confront the person would lie. There was all kinds of extremely awkward, horrible places. Some of the elders would ask personal questions of women about the abuse, and did this happen, that happened, explain it to me. That went out the window. They said no more of that. I had played a part in all of that, working with a select group of men in the writing department. The article that came out on child abuse, the article that came out in the October 8th, 91 Awake on child abuse, excellent article. The Watchtower got more response from the readers of the Awake on that article than any other article that was ever published other than an Awake magazine on animal what's that, experimentation. That Awake got more letters delivered to the headquarters on the issue of child abuse, except one other article in the Awake, and that was on animal experimentation. So people really love their dogs. and they really loved their kids. The cover of the Awake featured the child abuse issue is 17 pages on information, also on reporting laws on how to deal with children who are abused, or very, very excellent information. And it was extraordinary, the response from readers. And so as time went on, we were getting a handle on it. And then I made the suggestion that the governing body fully be aware of everything. So I put together I'd say it was a good foot high almost of material to give the governing body, and so they could see this is an international problem. I also told Harry that I had to leave Bethel because my mother was ill and I had to go home. And so he delivered that package to each member of the governing body 2 weeks after I left in December of 1992. After that, I was still working for the Watchtower. I was an outside researcher. I even had an appointment letter. I worked 4 more years on this from my house. I also wrote a big article on respect for women, which we have in that article, approved by the governing body, that no man is ahead of his wife or all other Christian women. He is only the head of his wife in spiritual matters. Anything else, it doesn't have to take his orders. It is in that magazine. There's a footnote from where it was a policy statement from previous years. And one of the men in the writing department, he went out and he interviewed all kinds of gals at Bethel, asking him the question of how are you treated by the men here. It was awful. He came back with tears in his eyes. And he said, we've got to do something about this. And we put out that article, which changed everything. Many of the elders never read the magazine. We did even look into that and found out that many of the men who were elders in this organization, they never read anything in the literature except once in a while they would read in the Awake, Watching the World. But they studied the study article in the Watchtower. So many of them were so ignorant. So the Watchtower started having the schools. They didn't allow therapy. They said, that's not scriptural. Go to the meetings and read the magazines and go out and service more. That'll cure everything. That went out the window in elders meeting after I left Bethel, I think 2 years later. Joe was at an elders meeting in Nashville. When he walked into that meeting, it was 200 elders there. And the man who was conducting it was a man from the service department in Brooklyn that my husband knew for years. So I was already out of the organization due to my wanting no part anymore because of the way they were handling child abuse, even to that day. So when my husband approached this fellow and they were talking, the man said to Joe, I hear Barbara is not active any longer in the organization. And this was around 97, 98, somewhere in there. And Joe said, no, she isn't. And it's over this. And he said, child abuse is a sin. I agree with you. He said, but child abuse is a crime, and it is not being handled as a crime. At the close of that meeting, the man who was in charge of it and conducted the school on spiritual things, and of course there was a new elders book that came out and so forth, he told the entire 200 people there, he said, I want to close this meeting. We've discussed child abuse and the issues, and I'm going to tell you again and again, child abuse is not only a sin, it's a crime. Well, after I had left Bethel a few years, I wrote a long letter about all the crime I was seeing in the congregation we were at before we went to Bethel. And I wrote Lloyd Berry a long letter, and I mentioned time and time again of these cases around here. And I had done a poll. I asked 2 elders in 3 congregations who are old friends of ours. And I said, I just, out of my own curiosity, we've been gone 11 years. How many public, not private, cases that your congregation has seen over 10 years, nearly 11 years? I said, I don't want to know anything about what's private and secret in your records. Public knowledge. Between the 3 congregations, it was 18 in an 11-year period. And this was public knowledge. How many was in the files that wasn't public knowledge? So I wrote Harry Poloyan, and out of that one, I also wrote Lloyd Berry, who was overwriting a long letter about this. They started making changes. Harry Poloyan responded to one of the complaints I had about known child abuse men who were having kids sitting on their lap at the Kingdom Hall during the meetings. One guy we knew, everybody knew he was a child abuse. It was in the police knew. And they were doing something about all this. This guy, every time he turned around at the Kingdom Hall, he had a baby in arms. A Grandpa Russ. Kid called him Grandpa Russ. One time I go into the Kingdom Hall and I see a little girl come in running ahead of her mother. Well, this man and his wife, this pedophile and his wife studied with them. Well, anyway, he's standing there talking to someone, and we don't have a big lobby at this Kingdom Hall. So I turned around just as this little girl, she must have been 4 years old, she ran in and she put her face into his privates. And in public, and we had the circuit overseer that day. And he and his wife were younger people and had been at Bethel years before. But they weren't old circuit overseers. They had that youthful vigor still. And as soon as I told Joe, I said, this is what I saw. I said, Russ has got kids on his lap during the Watchtower study. And I said, I'm going to talk to the circuit. He said, listen, you do it. You found all of this out. He says, I will stand beside you. I understand everything, but it's your finding. And so I told the circuit overseer, as soon as it was over, I said, he came off the platform and I said, you see those 2 doors back there? I said, I've got to tell you something. And I said, if you don't do what I ask, I'm out of those doors. And he knew we were former Bethelites, and he knew what I had done at Bethel. And so I said, I'm out of here. I'll never come back. I'll never cross the threshold of a Kingdom Hall until something is done about this. Told him what it was. I said, and so consequently, he called a meeting. Every man in responsible position in that congregation had to meet in the back with him. Afterwards, I wrote Harry Poloyan. After that, within 2 months, a body of elder letter came to every congregation in the world, and it said, do not allow anybody who has a history of molestation to hold a child on their lap at the Kingdom Hall, or no familiarity at all. I was seeing them, they were getting away with it at parties, or they go visit somebody at the house. Nobody knew that the guy was a molester. I found out through some of the people that I was talking to, and still I didn't talk much about what I did at Bethel, so they were all in the dark. And
these men who committed these crimes were not reported to law enforcement.
That's exactly right, because there wasn't 2 witnesses, or they repentant. That was my letter to the governing body member, Lloyd Berry. I said, this is ridiculous. And I went into detail upon detail about this. Eventually, they got it in their heads, and they did it right. I was gone out of Bethel 5 years. when they came out with a body of elder letter. Now this gets to your blue envelope. The body of elder letter was excellent, and it was all went to every congregation around the world. It was asking about to the elders to answer 12 questions and about known molesters. And if you have knowledge, people who are in position or were in position of responsibility in the congregation, that is someone who the records show, or you know personally, they are known, which means that through a court of law or a judicial hearing or something. Now, there's all kinds of circumstances that people can be accused of being a molester, and years later, they've never done anything wrong again. Somebody who, give you a big example of a 19-year-old guy who gets engaged to a 17-year-old girl in the Kingdom Hall. And so they have sex before they're married, and the parents don't like the guy. So they report it to the police as rape or molestation, especially molestation, not rape if they're under 18. That man then becomes known to the civil authorities because of what the parents have done. And maybe the man never served in prison. But Jehovah's Witnesses had a prison ministry for years and years and years. And I have firsthand knowledge. I had paperwork and everything. Some of the prison ministry, the witness men who were going in there, the only people that would study with Jehovah's Witnesses were molesters. And so when they left the prison, they served their time, they would go to the Kingdom Hall, and I had information proven, because people wrote me about the circumstance, that those men were marrying single sisters who had kids and then were raping the kids. This had to stop. And then the society was not changing their policies. And in 1997, I had already had it. I was talking to people out of Africa. One of the elders told me in Africa, he said, we have to obey the policies of the organization on these rules on sin, etc. He said, and when mother changes the policies, we can then protect the babies. I had it by 96, and I couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't going to the meetings, but the elders thought I was still working for the society. Joe never said a word to them about what was happening. 98, I didn't go to the memorial, and then they knew something was wrong. Bethelites and people like me as outside researchers, you have to get your work done. So it's understood you don't attend a meeting. So the elders, in the last few years, they didn't know and that I was effectively out. I started to do research early on the history of Jehovah's Witnesses because of the Proclaimers book I worked on. The more I started looking at the history of Jehovah's Witnesses, the more I realized that there's no foundation for them, the claims that they make, especially since 1975, nothing happened. But they rewarded Freddie Franz. Freddie Franz came up with the 1975 end of the world deal, and then they rewarded him, and Harry Poloyan talked to some of the governing body members. He said, why would you reward him, making him president of the Watchtower Society when 500,000 people left the organization? And so you know what the governing body member told him? He said, this man, Freddie Franz, was next in line. So did they really care? I mean, they might care about their religion, but they care more about their organization than they did about love. All those things, people got used to organization, and they forgot the members. They forgot the children. In fact, today, they don't even call people who are Jehovah's Witnesses, are not even called members, because members shows a vicarious liability at the top if you sue. over this. My husband's a plumber. He hires somebody. That man gets paid by my husband, and that man rapes a woman in a house that he's fixing the plumbing. They arrest the man for the rape, but they go after for the lawsuit and money the guy on the top, if he's the owner. Well, that's the Watchtower Society, vicarious liability. They were getting sued on the top because they employed the elders. Money has nothing to do with this. And so when the society sent out this letter in 1997, it was March 14th, about an article that they put out, which is Abhor What is Wicked. That article was written by Harry Poloyan. In it, he said, anybody who is a known molester will never hold a position in this organization, not even a pioneer thing. Men wrote in and asked, what does all this mean? They then put out an elder's letter explaining it, and that's when they asked the questions and said, send us the answers to the 12 questions and put it in the blue envelope. Every congregation had a blue envelope. It was for disfellowshipping notifications. So if you were disfellowshipped in a congregation, for whatever reason, it would go to a desk at headquarters affiliated with the service department. That desk was only receiving blue envelopes. So everywhere in the United States, for instance, there was a disfellowshipping. The notification for the society's files came in a blue envelope that every congregation had a pile of them. Maybe they didn't use it often. Well, in this particular case, on these questions on known molesters, they asked them to put it in the blue envelope. That's all that was about. What desk it would, that man would be then handling that for the legal department. The legal department, Harry Poloyan wrote me a letter. I have a number of letters for him. He said, we've accomplished a lot in the past 5 years, but who here at Bethel is responsible for 5 years of inactivity and did nothing while the children were being molested? And so that policy letter had to do with considerations of who to leave in and take out. That's all that was about, the 12 questions. And I know I have it in writing out of Australia. A letter went to the Australian branch. It came from the executive offices in New York, talking about the question that was asked: in this 12 question body of elder letter, it says, what does that mean about known molester? What it meant was, if he was known and convicted, known in the community, known in the organization, convicted, not accused. Accused is huge. Any organization, any big organization, always has accusations, but that doesn't mean it went through the investigation and an individual was found guilty. So in Watchtower, you have two databases. Whether they incorporate it in one on the computer, that's not my affair. But I have read the legal papers and court cases that I've been involved with. The Watchtower settled in 2008. A mammoth case. They paid $12.5 million settlement to 16 victims and 9 lawsuits. The transcripts of all of that are horrendous to read. I have them all. I put them on a CD years ago. They're on my Watchtower documents. All of the paperwork is on the Watchtower documents website, watchtowerdocuments.com. And we learned so much from those court cases about the Watchtower's practices and policies, and I learned that the settlement was $12.5 million due to an error. I wrote to a courthouse and I asked them, I said I wanted to buy all of the transcripts from this particular case in your courthouse. Inadvertently, I got paperwork by mistake from a settlement. The settlements are off, you never are told unless it is permission. But these cases, the settlements were never told. Somebody at that courthouse made a mistake and sent me settlement pages for one victim. When I multiplied it by the 16 victims, it came out to $12.5 million. And that included what the attorneys got, etc. So I put that together in a massive amount of work on the secrets of pedophilia and American religion. All of that proof is on my website. I am sorry that the Watchtower took so long to do the right thing. They still have plenty more work to do. There are plenty of elders out there. I received this morning a massive letter from someone about how many elders are hiding child abuse. This is my responsibility to get involved in any of particular cases, but I've been taught by the best of lawyers what has been going on, how come they're winning. There's two big cases right now in one in New Jersey, one in New York. One of them goes back to a particular case I know of from many years ago. The children have grown up and now are suing the society. Vicarious liability that they're trying to escape.
There has been, especially in recent years, a massive reckoning with Watchtower, Barbara. And I meant to ask you, I'm sorry to harp on this or to circle back around, but this was such a significant event for us underlings who were not in your position. To hear the Dateline special, when that happened, you don't have to go into detail with this, but I'm just curious, what happened at that moment when you were approached to do that and that came out? Because when I told everybody on my Stop the Shunning audience that I would be having you on, Barbara, they were very excited to hear your story. And many of the responses, because on YouTube there's something called a community page. So I told everybody on my community page that I would be speaking with you, and they said, "Oh, I remember the Dateline special, and I remember that there was an announcement made during the midweek meeting that there was going to be a special coming out, a news organization." They didn't even mention Dateline. They just said there's going to be a news organization that's going to be spreading apostate lies. Be careful. Don't watch this program. And like I said, Barbara, I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. My father was in Bethel in the late 60s to early 70s. He's still an elder to this day. He's been an elder since the arrangement has been instituted. My mother has always been a devout Jehovah's Witness since she was born. She was born in the early 50s. And my parents and I sat and we watched you. That's why this is so wild talking to you now. You probably get sick of hearing that. But at 14 years old, I remember sitting watching you and thinking, wow, we're not supposed to be sitting here as a family, as a Jehovah's Witness family, sitting watching you, and yet we were. And in my blood and guts, in my intuition, I always knew something was off about the Watchtower organization. I didn't 100% believe, but I was still stuck in it because it was my parents' religion. So when I mentioned it on my YouTube that I was going to have you on, a lot of people said, "Oh yes, I remember the quote Dateline special, and I remember that they warned us not to watch it." So I am very curious, if you don't mind, getting just a little bit into that while we have just a little bit of time left.
Yes.
What happened after that specifically?
After a number of years endeavoring to help Jehovah's Witnesses leaders put in place good child protection policies, at the end of 97, I quietly left the religion because I believed that Jehovah's Witnesses leaders were culpable for covering up the crime of child sexual abuse committed by Jehovah's Witnesses. One of the ways they did this was by not reporting abuse to the authorities. In addition, I knew that men who were known to have been convicted of child abuse in the past were being appointed to responsible positions in Jehovah's Witnesses congregations by claiming repentance, and they continued to molest children. In 1999, I decided to make the world aware of the Watchtower's irresponsible and negligent behavior, hoping that this way Jehovah's Witnesses governing body would change some of their policies and practices that did not protect children, but protected child molesters. But how? I decided to break what I call the 11th commandment. I laughingly call it that. Thou shalt not go public. That's the 11th commandment. I broke that. I went public. In early 2001, I flew to New York. There were circumstances behind the scenes we don't have time to go through how I got there. It happened through Christianity Today magazine a few years before. Then there was an article in Kentucky about Jehovah's Witnesses and child molestation due to the resigning of an elder, and he went public. That was
Bill Bowen.
That was right. And so then from there, I eventually met Bill Bowen, explained what I had done in the past, and we teamed up. And so the article that came out in Kentucky, we got a hold of the reporter. He that was over Bowen, and then they did a huge article in the Courier-Journal, and that article caused so much interest. Even the states around Kentucky, all the paper boxes, and you could read the title. Well, the title on the page, the front page, was about Jehovah's Witnesses and child molestation. And so every paper was sold. They even put a night shift on and to reproduce that paper. So one of us who knew a reporter at NBC, he got hold of me. And of course, I knew everything that was going on locally and so forth. I asked not to be put in that article in the Courier-Journal. I was interviewed by the reporter. I don't want my name in there. I knew what I needed to do. Bowen did not have the inside information that I had, never had. His was local information as an elder dealing with child abuse. So the individual I knew in Manhattan went to see his friend at NBC. He pointed to the new article that just came out in the Courier-Journal. They read it. That day, we got phone calls from NBC. And then within like a week and a half, Bowen and I were sitting in embassy offices in New York. I was able to prove what I had to say. I had the package that went to the governing body. NBC gave it to their attorneys. Everything was checked out. They knew that Watchtower couldn't possibly sue NBC because we had all the facts there and the proof that they read it and whatever. So that was a big decision. It was early 2001 that I flew to New York to be interviewed for a TV documentary show on NBC's Dateline program discussing the Watchtower Corporation, how badly it managed child sexual abuse perpetrated by Jehovah's Witnesses. The broadcast aired May 28, 2002. So what happened to me and Bowen? We were disfellowshipped. The society kept calling NBC. We actually finished the whole Dateline program the year before, in 2001 in the spring. But due to what happened at 9/11, at the last part of the year, we were supposed to go on in November of the last part of 2001. Well, everything was postponed. So Bowen kept calling NBC and to find out when. The society kept calling because somebody I knew here in Tennessee whose kids were molested, and I told her about the Dateline. she tells her brother-in-law, who calls Brooklyn and tells him about Dateline coming. So they're involved in trying to find out when it's coming. And so things are not shaping up very good as far as a date. And then this problem with the what do you do with Barbara Anderson and Bill Bowen as far as punishment? Well, my husband comes home from a meeting. Now, remember, my husband's still an elder. One day I asked him, because he sat in every meeting discussing me, because the society was in touch with the elders locally. And they had a judicial hearing they called me in on May 19th, 2002. And Joe says, well, you got a meeting this Friday. I said, great, I can't wait to be there. So we both went, and they asked all kinds of questions, because my article, I had put out a private article to a friend who is a former circuit overseer. And he then sent it on to Free Minds Journal, which was a apostate journal, in the January-March 2002 issue. And this is a private article, which is an apostate magazine. Somebody sent it to the society used it, sent it to the elders, to put me on a judicial hearing. I went, and everything they asked me about this, I said, you can't accuse me of anything here. This is private, copyright, all kinds of things I proved to them. They didn't know what to do about it. So this one elder who I didn't know, because I went away from the organization for years, and he says to me, I said, I want to leave. And I answered all your questions. And he said, but before you go, I want to ask you one question. And I knew what it was. He was going to ask me about how did I feel about the governing body. And I said, I said to him, before you ask me that question, I want to tell you something. I vowed to Jehovah God that I would never cross the threshold of any kingdom hall again until Jehovah's Witnesses do something about this mammoth problem they have protecting pedophiles and not children. And you made me break my vow by coming here to this judicial hearing. And I said, I'm leaving. And I walked out the door. Guess who was outside? The press. And the papers, Nashville paper headlines, local paper headlines. Well, Jairus was furious. And I know, because I know what happened on the inside. So I said I would appeal this. So Jairus wrote a letter to the congregation and said something to the effect, if something like this happens before, and I'm warning the elders, don't have your appeal meeting at the Kingdom Hall. So they hired a motel, a room, and 6 elders were there waiting for me. Well, my lawyer wrote them and said, my client is not going to appear before in a motel room with 6 elders, 6 men. She's not going to be there. So they disfellowshipped me from the last judicial hearing. See, so anyway, Joe put in his resignation letter and was disfellowshipped shortly thereafter. I said to him a few years later on the topic, and I said, why did you tell me that? Because he said, I said, why did we break up? Most of the couples, when one leaves, the other doesn't. The marriage goes under, but ours didn't. All these years. And you've been going to the meetings by yourself. You've been an elder for 4 years. I'm out. How come our marriage still stayed? He said it was a wonderful, wonderful marriage. He said, I wasn't about to give up my marriage for a religion. And I thought, oh my goodness. He embarked then on a study. We had every book printed on religion, and he embarked on a study thing. But anyway, he put in his resignation. And when I said, you could sit at those meetings, that last one, when they told about this private letter and read the letter to you all elders, this. And I said, how could you stand that? He said, wanted to know what they were doing. He said, the last year, I believed everything you said. I just didn't let you know. He said, you know why? I was covering your ass. That's what he was doing from within. And they didn't realize it. But many of those elders told him on the side, if it was my kid that was molested, I would go immediately to the police. Immediately. They were not happy with the Watchtowers thingy about keeping it in-house due to a religious belief on sin. And so that's how that all worked out. And we had, until my husband died this past February, we had 65 years of a wonderful, wonderful life together. We saw eye to eye, even when I was out those four years, those 3 years, and he was still a wonderful practicing elder. But he always did what he believed was right by the Bible, not this other interpretation. And
So I am so glad that you had Joe in your corner.
yeah.
And I know that everybody listening here is going to just, their brain's going to explode that you had such a wonderful man and that support in your corner. And what also kills me about this, Barbara, as we begin to wrap up this incredible story, is how you were treated and how these men viewed you and just everything that transpired, all because you were trying to protect children. You weren't even ragging the organization.
Oh,
You weren't trying to start some sort of revolution or drive a wedge between anything. You were just trying to implement protocols that would protect children.
I was a mom. I was a mom.
As a mother. And what does that say about this organization that's claiming to be the mouthpiece for God?
Yeah.
You are an absolute inspiration, and I will say badass.
Yes.
For,
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
for
And
everything you did.
it was circumstance. I was, like I said from the very beginning, I've always been a fighter for righteousness, always. Even when I wasn't religious, or it just, that's the way I am. And to see that this was going on, I could not wrap my mind around it. I got a letter last night through email, and the woman who wrote me that letter, it must be 20 pages long. I'm not exaggerating. It's the longest letter I have ever received. When she sent that to me through email, she also sent her disassociation letter to the governing body. So it's the first time I've ever gotten, at the same time they received a disassociation. She says, I haven't attended meetings, but I was molested so many times I lost count. And she said, so I haven't been active in years, but I've never disassociated myself. She said, I saw you on television the other night, and one of the major programs we did 2 years ago. And so she said, I realized I needed to do that. So she sent me the letter she sent them. And it was a mammoth letter, I'm telling you. And she outlined every time that she was molested by this one, by that one, or elders covering up this one by that one. They got to get their act together. I'm not against religion. I don't discuss my beliefs because I don't think it's anybody's business. Belief causes argument, and many of the ex-witnesses they got this belief and this religion and that religion. That's their business. That's their foundation, or that's their truth. We all have our truths from how we were brought up, who our parents were, whatever. So I don't get into argument. I tell people, if you ask me a question about religion, $2.50 will get me and my opinion and on the subway. You're not going to get any, $2.50 will get you on the subway. That's all. No opinions from me. And but when you harm, that's the difference. If you harm in the name of religion, I will do something. And so are many other people around the world. In Norway, for example, wonderful rulings. In the Eastern countries of Europe, other countries are looking into the human rights of children. To shun a child because they act like a stupid kid at 14 years old or 12 years old. And so they're disfellowshipped and shunned, and the parents are throwing them out. This has got to stop. The shunning of children and even the shunning of adults. What in the world is that really going to do for anybody? It doesn't. They're even changing the policies a little bit because they change the words a little bit here, a little bit there.
It's you know what I call it, Barbara? It's just it's putting lipstick on a pig.
Yes.
It's recycling and regurgitating and shuffling the papers on the desk. It's no real concrete change. It's still a historical precedent of mandated shunning and treating the other person as if they are dead. And it's directive from on high from the governing body. Yes.
At this point, we're talking about child abuse or my past and so forth. Shunning is a whole nother subject we can get into. I met when I was in New York last week, and we went to talk to two organizations on protection of children. And we talked about the shunning. And also we talked about something that I am very, very, very interested in, and that's penitent privilege. And clergymen not having to report to the authorities when a person who has done a horrible thing, so I did a terrible crime. Okay, so I stole. But I'm getting old and I kept the secret. Nobody arrested me. And but I believe in hellfire. Okay. So, I go to the priest or I go to the minister and I confess. And because I'm afraid I'll fry after I die. So, they listen, and whatever, like a specific scripture says, whatever is sealed on this earth is sealed in the heaven by this representative of heaven. And so most of the states respect penitent privilege or ecclesiastical privilege. And so that minister or priest is not required to go to the authorities about what this individual said. About
Another thing that Watchtower has been abusing.
And that's right.
Exploit and abuse. Yes.
That's right. They're trying to get in on these court cases and say, oh, we have penitent privilege. We're clergy. How many years they denied that they were clergy? Yeah.
Oh, Barbara.
Well, I think I've said enough, but I'll add some things that will show you how active we all have been over this issue. Ever since Dateline, I have participated in at least 40 interviews, TV, radio, newspaper, whatever. Anybody that will listen, I'm there, or I share it with other people who will go forward. What I didn't tell, and I want you all to know, that in 2009, I was invited to speak at the Vatican, and I did. And priests, nuns, and it was, here I am, a former Catholic. Well, the problem was in Italy at that time in 2009, and I don't think it's gotten any better as far as molestation. There were headlines in papers across Italy about the problem of priests molesting children. So there were XJWs, wonderful people that made arrangements through an organization that is against Jehovah's Witnesses, by the way. Jehovah's Witnesses back in 2009 were the second largest religion in Italy. And so there was an organization set up to try to get rid of the witnesses in Italy. Well, a ex-witness who was a reporter and also a professor in Naples, and he knew some of these people, so he showed them all the stuff coming out of the United States. So they went to the person who was directed at the Vatican, had been for years. We call him one of the 10 apostles, because it was at the time like 10 men who were running the Vatican. And his job was to operate Ave Maria, the radio station of the Catholic Church across the world. and to see what he could do to get rid of Jehovah's Witnesses in Italy. And so they made arrangements with him, and that's what happened. And so we were had a fabulous introduction into the Vatican. From there, we went to two Catholic churches, huge Catholic churches, one going back to the 13th century, spoke there. From there, we went to France, the organization that is the represents the government organization against cults. I can never say, I don't speak French or other languages very well. And so, Millet-Voods or something like that. Anyway, that is a government organization. I met with the representatives of the French government, the representative of the education of kids in the whole state of France. I gave a lecture there, and some XJWs who I knew in France came, and the policies were discussed. The man who was in charge of the education of the kids in France, and others who were in charge of the anti-cult movement, terrible stuff in the mountains where children are being raised and no parents, and the government was really taking a great interest in helping the kids, the human rights of the kids. So we spoke there. From there, we went to entirely five countries to speak. And since then, has been work in Germany. I am hoping to go to some of the Asian countries in the future because of the human rights of children. And there are wonderful former witnesses and wonderful people who are never intended to be a witness or out of the witnesses who are working on this.
Excellent work.
Well, you know, talk about what you know. I don't know anything else except all the years and years of.
But you are a wealth.
I think.
But you are a wealth of information and a legend, frankly. That maybe that sounds over the top, but I believe it's true. Like I said, you've been doing this for so long, but with the advent of social media and the internet, people are discovering you and your contribution. So, Barbara, thank you so much for all the work that you continue.
It's a joy to be of use. When my mom was dying in I can't even remember. I got so many dates in my brain. 2006. She didn't have long to live, and the doctor and I were standing by the bed, and she was on a lot of pain medication, but she could talk. And she said, I know that I'm not going to survive this. So she said she had disease, and then at the end, pneumonia set in. So she knew she didn't have long. And she said to me, I would like to see how this is all going to turn out, but that's okay. I know you're going to do fine in this. And she said, and the doctor was standing next to me, and actually he was holding my hand because he was so moved by my mom. And so she said, you know, she was 91. And so she said, I'm not of use anymore at this age, so I can go to my rest. And he had tears running down his eyes. And what I haven't said here is that how our son has shunned us for over 23 years. I've got two grandchildren. I don't know. One of them I never knew her name even until somebody else found out her name was Olivia. And he has shunned us because I went public. He told us it was because he went public. He wanted to keep it in-house. We taught him never to forsake Jehovah's Witnesses. And so we had that responsibility. But listen, he can belong to any religion he wants to. He's 63 years old, as long as he doesn't do harm. The same with his kids. Joe and I faced that up, that we were responsible for this. But anyway, they're good people, and it is their obligation to not cause harm. If they want to believe that, whatever they want to believe, that's their right. And I believe in freedom of expression. The sorrowful thing to say is Jehovah's Witnesses fought at the Supreme Court level, I think 129 cases, and won, I think, like 47 of those cases. They established the freedoms for everybody in the United States to have freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And they forbid their people to have freedom of speech and freedom of religion. That is one big problem.
You speak truth, Barbara. You speak truth.
I do welcome questions through my website, watchtowerdocuments.com. There is a link, and they write to me. I might not answer immediately because of the situation. There's so many, but I will. And if they have a problem, a specific problem, I can usually point them to the right direction, to what legal people they could be talking to in their state, and make them smile again. That's really what I really want them to do. We only have a short while we're on this earth, and to go through what children of Jehovah's Witnesses go through, they don't want to be adult Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're shunned. This is sick, just absolutely sick. So something is taking place around the world with governments looking into this. And thanks to people like you, you allow me to speak my piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Barbara, words cannot express the gratitude that you came on my channel today and shared your story. A huge highlight of my life, frankly. Thank you for your timeless activism. Your tireless activism, and which is timeless. Your tireless efforts in activism over the years, being an advocate for CSA survivors and for trying to instigate change and, trying to help people who are still trapped in Watchtower. Your contribution and your bravery is an inspiration to so many people over the years and continues to be for me and countless others. Just thank you, a huge thank you from the XJW community and me for everything that you've done. Again, if you enjoyed this interview, please like and subscribe, share this interview with other people, send it out so people can hear Barbara's story. She is an invaluable resource into Watchtower's history and to this issue. Again, Barbara, thank you so much for coming on the channel today. I really, really appreciate it. It was a huge honor.
Until we meet again.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.